Hi, everybody. I would like to warmly welcome everybody to our discussion of our latest research on the clandestine gray zone influence impact on the election process in the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Serbia. My name is Lóránt Győri. I'm an expert at Political Capital Institute and coordinator of this project. First, I would like to share with you some minor technical details about our schedule. After our brief remarks, I will present the regional outlook, followed by the case studies of the Czech Republic and Serbia. And our discussion would end on a panel on Russia's current war and information warfare. Our research results presented here today are preliminary findings, and we will be sharing them with you around mid-July in a set of country reports. So getting back our research, we have never envisioned when we started to plan our research back in August 2021 with the generous support of the Open Information Partnership that we would be dealing with the new war on top of the raging pandemic and our hybrid regimes. But as it turned out, our research is more relevant as ever, as the media we focused on, the so-called gray zone, turned out to be Kremlin's asset, legitimizing the war on a daily basis. And now, without further ado, I would yield the floor to Elliot, regional coordinator at the Open Information Partnership.
Thanks, Lóránt. Good morning, everyone. So, as Lóránt said, my name is Elliot. I'm the network coordinator for Central Europe and the Balkans at the Open Information Partnership. So we work with a lot of these groups to steer this research along. And yeah, I would like to make a few remarks. I think it's interesting to note that as OIP enters its 5th year, current events have made our work, the importance of our work abundantly clear. It is our hope at OIP that despite the war in Ukraine and everything associated with it, one of the positives we can try and draw from it is that the work of organizations like yourselves will gain increasing recognition and ultimately have more impact. In this context, it is my pleasure to introduce this conference on malign domestic and foreign grey zone influence in elections, particularly given the regional collaborative approach of the work we'll be discussing today. This is precisely how we amplify our voices and maximize the resources available to us. So yeah, it's my absolute pleasure to be here today. I'm really excited to see the findings. And yeah, with that, I won't take any more time and I'll hand back over to Lóránt. But very nice to see you all today.
Thank you very much, Elliot. So we are really ahead of our schedule. So I would now dive into our regional research results and preliminary findings. Let me share my screen with you for a short PPT presentation. So as you can see, and Elliot has mentioned, we have been focusing on the so-called dirty campaigns posed by domestic and foreign malign actors in the election campaigns in the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Serbia. During my presentation, I would like to reflect and answer 3 basic questions. The first is, what is the gray zone media? The second, how does it work? What's its modus operandi? And finally, what impact does the gray zone have in our countries and in Central Eastern Europe? More general. So our research, as I mentioned, focused on the mapping and exposure of the gray zone in the run-up to the Czech, Hungarian, and Serbian elections. And we monitored their communication before the elections and then this year during the war as well. So what is the gray zone? Gray zone media can be differentiated from the mainstream media based on 2 elements. The first is a very specific strategic communication. So gray zone present some form of hyper-partisan and sometimes even extremist political communication on social media platforms, utilizing conspiracy theories and ignoring standards of ethical journalism. When it comes to their position within the media spaces, they avoid establishing traditional media companies to be able to hide their ownership, editorial, or financial structures. As a result, they can disseminate propaganda without disclosing the source of it. When it comes to the modus operandi, we have found 3 political and financial ways that contribute to the establishment and stability and the long-term sustainability of the gray zone media. The first is about nationalistic and extremist subcultures. These subcultures in our countries tend to create conspiracy and clickbait sources. For well-known reasons, they are usually non-transparent because either they are too extreme from an ideological point of view, or they want to maximize ad revenues without disclosing their true nature. The second most important element of the modus operandi are the hybrid regimes in Serbia and Hungary. So basically, untransparent hyper-partisan sources are part of the government or opposition parties' strategic communication due to the media dominance exerted by the hybrid regime itself. So on the governmental side, the government wants to reach out to independent or even opposition voters and electorate, but they already control most of the traditional channels of communication. So they have to invent a new way to make these people consume propaganda. On the other side of the aisle, opposition parties, opposition actors usually don't have access to a strong and healthy independent media, or they just lack basic channels of communication. So they also turn to the establishment of the gray zone. And finally, on the back of the pandemic, we have witnessed the emergence of new anti-establishment social movements, especially anti-vax movements that have already also created their semi-transparent media infrastructures, especially in the Czech Republic and Hungary. And the fourth modus operandi is foreign autocratic influence that is very, very much present in the gray zone. And we're talking mostly about pro-Russian communication. And there are 3 reasons for that. The first is the transparency itself. So these media can be easily financed, both in the background, without disclosing the real actors of influence. So they are some sort of guns of hire. The second is infiltration. We have many researches and evidences that extremists and already the new anti-vax subcultures have been infiltrated by Russian agents of influence or even by Russian intelligence services. And the second part of the infiltration is the hybrid regime itself. So hybrid regime either finance or establish the gray zone media, parts of the gray zone media, and they reassert their foreign policy views there as well. So in Hungary's case, the pro-government gray zone outlets represent the Hungarian government's very strong pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian stance. And finally, ideology. Even if these media wouldn't need any financing from outside actors, or they weren't infiltrated by outside actors, their ideology makes them very much become more of a pro-Russian or pro-Beijing media and political actor, because they are inherently an anti-establishment phenomena, and their audiences is very anti-West, Eurosceptic, and their political position is the same as well. So when it comes to the modus operandi, we also try to understand the composition and the main central elements of each media ecosystem in the 3 countries to map the central elements. We use the hyperlinks found in social media posts or web page articles. Why hyperlinks? Hyperlinks are essential for editors or authors to really make their argumentation, their narratives, disinformation narratives strong by referencing respectful third-party media, third-party political actors. And also these sites, as any other site, use hyperlinks to reroute their audience to like-minded media outlets. So what the hyperlink network between the gray zone media and third-party media revealed was that in the Czech Republic, new anti-vax media in cooperation with extremist conspiracy sites dominate the Czech gray zone network. When it comes to pro-Russian communication, the now banned Czech site of Sputnik had an oversized influence on the network's pro-Russian nature. In Hungary, pro-government or opposition-oriented hyper-partisan sources are the central mobilizing force of the network. But when we look at specific local pro-Kremlin outlets, they are rather marginal in the Hungarian network, which is a good and a bad news. It's a good news because they are not a central element of our network. It's a bad news because the network, or at least the pro-government part of it, is still very much pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian, and this is due to their connections to the hybrid Hungarian regime. And finally, in Serbia, pro-Kremlin opposition sources that are also critical of the government are organizing the Serbian network, such as Novi Standard and Pravda, but I'm sure Nikola will talk about those in more detail later. What differentiates from the Serbian network from the Hungarian and Czech one when it comes to foreign malign influence is that the Serbian network as a whole is carrying out the pro-Russian communication, regardless of the political position of any media or actor in that network. And finally, what's the impact of the gray zone media ecosystem on a regional and the local scale? When we are talking about numbers, we can see that these networks encompass from 50 to 100 pages, web pages, new media pages, social media pages in each country. When we look at only the campaign-related messaging, so not all the messaging that they are producing, but only campaign-related political messaging, in the three countries combined, these networks churn out at least 10,000 messages, social media posts or articles on a monthly basis. That's a lot. And when it comes to the network that they are able to construct and mobilize using hyperlinks, so their networks run into the hundreds. As you can see, in the Czech network, we had over 500 nodes, and in Hungary, 600. And this is only a minimum estimate because, we didn't generate like several layers of our network, but only the first two layers or cores. So when it comes to the impact in political and media terms, when it comes to the impact of the gray zone, we could establish 5 main elements of that impact. First, the gray zone is able to rebrand, refresh anti-democratic, anti-West populism and populist forces, not only in Central Eastern Europe, but we assume in Europe as general, and they also contribute to the stability and branding of the hybrid regimes in Central Eastern Europe. The second impact involves their role as a network. So based on our network results, it became evident that gray zone media serve as an interlocutor or bridge between local extremist pro-Russian forces and the European far-right and the American alt-right. A prime example is the main Hungarian neo-Nazi site called Kuruc.info. Kuruc.info, for example, referenced Daily Stormer, which is a well-known international neo-Nazi site, Also Gateway Pandit, which is an alt-right outlet in the US, and finally Matteo Salvini's Twitter handle. So this is how they embed the gray zone into the local, regional, and European extremist networks and media environment. The third impact concerns the new social movements. It became evident that the gray zone in general is able to turn the new anti-vax movements and media infrastructures towards Russia and China. Whereas in the beginning, these new anti-vax media primarily focused only the anti-government messaging. Later, they picked up pro-Kremlin or pro-Beijing messages from other gray zone outlets, and now they are one of the main venues of anti-Western conspiracy theories, for example, in the Czech Republic or in Hungary. The fourth impact is about pro-Russian communication in general. So the gray zone has become a central, difficult to control and viral channel of pro-Russian rhetoric on a regional scale. A prime example is Hungary, where the local pro-Kremlin outlets are no longer an important part of pro-Russian messaging in the Hungarian media space. Instead, we see the gray zone stepping in and forming a new independent pro-Kremlin communication on steroids. And finally, this also means, as a fifth takeaway, that they have a key role in Russia's hybrid war in the current conflict and military aggression against Ukraine by disseminating the Kremlin's tactical and strategic narratives, for example, about NATO being an aggressor or Ukraine committing genocide, or that there have been no mass killings occurring in Bucha in the vicinity of Kiev. So I will stop my presentation here, and I would like to ask Nikola first to provide us with some insights into the Serbian gray zone and into your main findings.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Lóránt. I will briefly go over to the main conclusions of the Serbian report and explain a bit the nature of the Serbian gray zone. But first, what is important to be said is that in Serbia, basically, there is a phenomenon that we could call media capture, which, of course, I would say exists in many countries now in Central and Eastern Europe. But Serbia is one of the countries where this media capture has been the most extreme, because basically almost all mainstream media, so all national frequency television stations and all the dominant print media are all holding a pretty strong pro-government line, practically bordering with blatant propaganda. In the case of most of these media, there are of course nuances there, but you could say that the mainstream media space is quite one-sided, and this is a finding that is confirmed by all monitoring missions, both those done in the elections and the civil society who monitors media between elections. So this is the starting point. An important thing also is that the Serbian political landscape is highly fragmented. And you have a dominant political party, the Serbian Progressive Party, SNS, being in power for the last 10 years, with coalition partners, of course, but usually not really needing them to form the government. And you have a quite fragmented opposition, which only occasionally basically creates some kind of wider alliances, but the landscape is pretty fragmented. There are all kinds of political parties from center left, liberal, to center right, to far right, and none of these parties is actually strong enough to even come close to being a danger for the government, which practically means that all these parties, even when they do create pre-election coalitions or when they create these alliances, it is very hard to find a coherent policy. So it kind of gets really confusing. Those who are just observing Serbian politics very shallowly probably would not really understand the Serbian political landscape, because honestly speaking, even for us who live in Serbia, it tends to be quite confusing sometimes. And therefore, when we speak about opposition in Serbia, it is never exactly clear who are we talking about. So I'll make a distinction here between the let's say centrist or pro-Western opposition, so meaning political parties who are leaning towards EU integration, who are more or less pro-Western in their stance, and you have right-wing opposition political parties who are, let's say, either advocate strongly for neutrality, or some of them can even be strongly pro-Russian. Another division between political parties in Serbia, which are nominally in the position, is between those who are considered to be the strong opposition, the harsh opposition, the real opposition, we sometimes say. So the political parties who are strongly against the government, who reject any kind of cooperation with the ruling party, and who basically act as a real opposition. You have also this other group of political parties, which tend to be right-wing parties that are nominally in the opposition, but you can see on several occasions that they're not really attacking the government when the government is most sensitive. They're avoiding some topics which other parties would naturally use. And they kind of also serve the interests of the ruling party occasionally because they are the most extreme examples of the ruling party. So they are the boogeyman, maybe to show what would be the alternative to the ruling party, and in that sense they serve their purpose. But of course, all of these lines are quite blurry in Serbia because of the lack of media space generally for the opposition. Of course, pro-government loyal opposition has a lot more media space than those which is, let's say, critical of the government. But all in all, this is still far less than the government has. So practically there is no media space where you could have debate about all of these major issues which you were supposed to have public debate about. And this naturally kind of completely let's say confuses the waters, makes the opposition parties quite often without any concrete messages about regarding the political programs which they might argue for, but generally it's a very polarized picture between supporting the government or being against the government due to different reasons. And this is also confusing because there are parties who criticize the government for being maybe too European, maybe going too much in the direction of cooperation with the West. And of course, there are those who are criticizing for being nationalist and for not really getting Serbia closer to the EU. So the gray zone in Serbia is quite large, and it is often hard to actually differentiate between what are the media in the gray zone and what are the media which are not in the gray zone. Because in the entire media space in Serbia, most of the media space in Serbia acts propagandistically, basically. So sometimes these lines are very hard to draw, but we can broadly say that there are different pro-government media and pages on the internet which are either non-registered at all, so there nobody knows who owns them. They just get these promoted posts on Facebook, which a lot of people see and read, but nobody knows who is behind it. You also have recently registered media who were registered, let's say 1 year before the elections, which tend to serve also as government mouthpieces. Basically, then you have these conspiracy and clickbait websites, which basically spread these very confusing messages that are often anti-government, but sometimes they're not. Even the same media can have basically both pro-government and anti-government messages. And you have a quite strong group of pro-Russian media. So media which tend to have a quite strong pro-Russian stance, which is a stronger element in their reporting than whether they are pro-government or anti-government, or whether they are, let's say, unregistered. And the main trait of this kind of media is that they strongly support Russia, and these media are both numerous in our gray zone list, and they're also quite influential. When it comes to the topics which gray zone media in Serbia tends to cover, at least tends to cover in this period, which we have examined, one of the dominant topics was the Rio Tinto lithium mine. That was a controversial project of building a lithium mine in Western Serbia by the Rio Tinto multinational company, which was basically a topic which brought a lot of people in the streets protesting against the government. So it is a pretty important topic in the months before the concrete electoral campaign. So this was one of the main news of last year. And this was quite by far the dominant topic of the gray zone media. You also had pro-government, anti-government messages, but also this very interesting group of anti-government, but also anti-establishment messages, with, even though they criticized the government, they also criticized basically all political actors as being part of this, let's say, Western conspiracy to basically hurt Serbia. So Rio Tinto was basically at the same time an environmental issue, so bringing a lot of people with let's say central left or green ideological viewpoints, but also nationalist, because it was seen as a treason, as something which could bring permanent damage to Serbia. Then, of course, you had issues such as crime and corruption, the issues of nationalism, which tend to be quite important, I would say, for most media in Serbia, not only in the gray zone, but these nationalist messages tend to be either neutral in the sense of not being directed against anyone or in favor of any political side in Serbia, but you also have nationalist messages which are strongly pro-government, promoted the government as patriotic, and the anti-government nationalist messages, so those presented the government as being traitorous. So these are some of the main topics which we could see in our sample of gray zone media. And it's an important thing to say that basically, according to our research and the conversations that we had with experts in this field, basically gray zone media in Serbia are not all propagandistic in the sense that they are serving the purpose or serving somebody's political interests. Some of these media are actually genuine. They represent genuine sources of information for one part of the population. So in that sense, you could say that they are the child of the 21st century and the dominance of the internet in a state where mainstream media tend to be quite weak and where trust in media tends to be quite low, as well as media literacy. So this provides ample space on the internet for different kinds of pages to send different kind of messages. So both to get clicks and basically have this kind of basically financial sustainability by having this kind of reporting, and then of course also having these media which serve the purpose, which are reporting in the interest of some political actors. You could easily see, just looking at the list of these media, that the majority of them tends to be right-wing and pro-Russian. That is some kind of, let's say, general direction of most of these media. I would say this comes both from this genuine side, so like these media which tend to feel a hole basically in Serbian media landscape, because the very few media who are independent and critical of the government tend to be pro-Western. You have only a couple of mainstream media which are relevant and which are independent, and they are mainly pro-Western. And then you have, of course, lots of local or smaller specialized media which mainly survived through the nations. So basically there is a very large media space there for critical voices against the government, but on the right side, so with nationalist and pro-Russian messages. So there are a lot of these media who basically represent an important source for this group of people, for people who have this kind of ideological viewpoint. And of course, on the other hand, some of these media are instrumentalized, and basically they are not genuine media in the sense that well, media should be, but they are basically just propaganda tools of some political actors, mostly the government. Now, why is the government even investing in the gray zone? Why is it doing anything in the gray zone if I just had mentioned basically it controls most of the mainstream media? And according to our research and the experts we spoke with, basically the problem is that the government tries to control everything. And the internet is the only part which they cannot control. They have a very strong control over television stations. They have quite strong control over daily print media, but not so strong control over the internet, because internet still tends to be rather free and uncensored and basically open to all kinds of messages. So basically the government also wants to have a say there, wants to somehow influence messaging there. And it could be either by promoting its own messages through different channels, or even more importantly, by avoiding damage by basically having campaigns against the opposition. Because as long as the opposition is not supported, as long as the opposition doesn't get any votes, it doesn't hurt the government that directly whether anti-government messages are spread there or not. Because if you bring everything into question with some conspiracy theories and these kind of conspiracies against Serbia, where the Serbian government is just a puppet of George Soros or whatever, then why would you vote for anybody? Because this whole system is corrupt, the whole system is wrong. So that actually leads people into abstention and not voting for opposition parties, at least not for these opposition parties who are actually challenging the government. So that could be one of the reasons why the government has an interest there, because the government also, as we know, also tries to control political parties. So to control the messages coming from political parties in its favor. So of course, then naturally you also have the media, which are also tried to be controlled in this way. Of course, you have a lot of media who are directly relying on Russian sources for information, and which tend to be strongly pro-Russian. It is not entirely clear how linked these media are actually with Russia. They are mostly linked with what we can see is that they're linked quite strongly when it comes to which are their sources. They use a lot of Russian sources, not only Sputnik Serbia, which is active in Serbia, but also some Russian language media, which do not have an influence in Serbia by themselves. So basically, some of these media probably have some kind of a political agenda over there, but also they want clicks, because having pro-Russian messages in Serbia is rewarded. Even some editors of the mainstream of the mainstream media claim that when they have pro-Russian messages, they have better sales. So basically, this is all one of the maybe accidental driving forces of pro-Russian narratives in Serbia. But I guess we can speak about that later. And just to conclude, we just had election 3rd of April. And the big question is, how strong are these media in the campaign? How much influence they have in the campaign? And it is not quite clear, but what we can definitely say about these elections is that the right-wing opposition, so both that consider critical and consider loyal, actually won more votes than was expected. This could be due to the war in Ukraine. We can come to that a bit later as well. But definitely this is then linked to the messages coming from some of these media and the general views in Serbia held about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Basically, this shows that these media actually in times of crisis, such as this one, as well as the time of the pandemic, especially during the acute phase of the pandemic in the beginning, can have quite a strong impact, much stronger than in, let's say, usual circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikola, for your excellent presentation. And I think you touched upon 3 key issues when it comes to our investigation. First, that there are deep-rooted structural problems with the political systems, for example, in Serbia, where people cannot access mainstream independent media, so they turn towards alternative sources of information, and also the local elites have lost their ability to control the new media and the political communication there. So there's an impetus for them to invent new ways. And finally, in times of crisis, as you mentioned, these types of clandestine media are very, very problematic, especially when it comes to the war. So now I would like to ask Kristína Šefčíková from our Czech partner, Prague Security Studies, to present the Czech case and not so big problems compared to the other two countries.
Thank you, Lóránt. So good morning, everyone. I'm Kristína Šefčíková. I'm the project manager of our regional security program focused on disinformation. And when we were doing this research, we basically identified these two layers of the Czech gray zone media. The first layer are media which are more established. They have been around for 5 to 10 years, so they also have some established readership, followership, and reach on the Czech information space. And these are mainly websites spreading conspiracy theories and clickbait websites, which also share conspiracies to a certain extent, but mainly they use clickbait titles and just don't respect the standards of ethical journalism in general. These are mainly private media or blogs with lower transparency. And a part of this layer is also pro-Russian media with the very dominant role of the Czech branch of Sputnik, which is surrounded by this network of approximately 40 conspiracy websites, which republish its content or at least overtake the narratives and spread them out into the Czech information space. And the second layer we identified are much newer media that sprang up in the last 1 or 2 years in connection to the pandemic. So there are these anti-vaccination media that profile themselves on the opposition to COVID-19 restrictions, vaccination, or even doubted the existence of COVID-19 itself. And they have a different modus operandi than the first layer. So these are mostly run by some civil or even political movements, and they are much more transparent. But I will talk about it later. And also they are usually led by public faces. So just to dive more into the background of these media, the first layer, meaning the conspiracy and clickbait websites, their transparency varies, but it's quite low when it comes to both organizational and financial models and also their editorial teams. Like some of them have known authors. Sometimes there is even knowledge of some connection to political parties or former politicians. But many of the authors also write under some pseudonyms or are just not indicated at all. And when it comes to the financing, some of them run all ad revenues, or they sell some merchandise, books, maybe some spiritual seminars, or there is no information about how they work. And generally they are very ambiguous. And this is the biggest contrast with the new layer of the anti-vaccination media. So as I said, they are often run by these movements, and some of them turned into political entities that even ran in the parliamentary election. However, they were unsuccessful. They didn't pass the 1% margin. And because of this political aspect, they are much more transparent. They use transparent accounts and crowdfunding. And we could see that some of these movements really acquired hundreds of thousands Czech crowns or even millions. Or they also sell some merchandise, and they are politically engaged also in the sense that they organize these protests and they cooperate with the Czech National Conservative Opposition, who was also against the COVID-19 restrictions. So we could see this collaboration between them. And but if I should say some common denominators for these, for both of these layers of media, it would be that they profile themselves as the only source of objective and uncensored truth, as opposed to the mainstream. And they all support the national conservative opposition, meaning parties like Tricolor, Freedom and Direct Democracy, or Free Bloc, which are these right-wing or almost far-right parties, which are Eurosceptic and, as I said, also oppose the COVID-19 restrictions. So they were at least supported in the way that these media gave like exclusive space to representatives of these parties. So invited them for interviews or just let them publish their own texts. And a lot of the anti-vaccination media work in the form of internet televisions or just these live streaming media, which in this way, like live stream the protests or the content of these political parties, and especially Free Bloc worked in this way. And sometimes their representatives just like sit down in front of the camera and talk to their followers, and all these anti-vaccination media reshared these live streams and videos. So the anti-vaccination media have this very personal approach to their followers. So they have these public faces that often talk to their audience through these live streams, videos, and they are very like informal in how they communicate with their audience. And as I said, they are much more transparent. And when it comes to the messages these media were spreading, as I said, they profile themselves as the opposition to the mainstream media. And they actually accused mainstream media, mostly the public broadcaster, the Czech television, of like being biased and acting as a third candidate in the election, and basically manipulating the election process by only giving space to certain representatives of political parties and just not giving the voice to everyone on the political spectrum. Also, they were very critical of what is now the Czech government, which is the coalition of the SPOL, in translation, Together Alliance, and the alliance of the Pirate Party and mayors, which are generally Western-leaning, pro-European, etc. So these grays media saw these parties as like servants of Brussels who do not care about Czech national interests and will only bring like negative impact on the country, such as like destroyal of the economy, etc. And on the other hand, as I said, they very much supported the national conservative opposition, which was presented as the only rational choice in the election, right, because of the fact that they actually care about the national interest and they don't want to give in to external actors such as the European Union, and they like fight for the freedom of Czech people from COVID-19 restrictions and such. Also, these media were, of course, very anti-EU, so they repeated the narrative about Brussels dictate, and they saw EU as this external actor that doesn't care about the Czech people and their needs and interests, and like impose these irrational policies such as the Green Deal on them. So all in all, our grays media scene has these two layers, which both basically feed on people who have this distrust towards the mainstream media and public institutions, and have nationalist tendencies and attitudes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristína, for your insights and sticking to the schedule. I think you have highlighted one other important characteristics of the whole phenomena, the fact that these kinds of media can form political and social capital for new political movements to be kickstarted. And as it happened in Serbia with Rio Tinto, in the Czech Republic, they used the New Green Deal to really try to put a spin on very important and mainstream political issues, and then present, in the Czech case, a more anti-liberal and anti-West approach. So right now, I think we are pretty good on our schedule. So I would move on to our final panel on more generally Russia's information warfare and hybrid warfare. I would like to introduce and welcome our panelists. Grigorij Mesežnikov, director of the Slovak EVO think tank. Adam Lelonek, program officer of the International Republican Institute's Beacon Project, our methodology partner in crime, because we cooperated with IRI in this project to create the great networks that I was just presenting you before. And Kristína Šefčíková, once again from PSSI, and Nikola Burazer, executive director from European Western Balkans. So let me start our discussion with a more general question. So since the start of the war, there has been an interesting polarization of media discourses and official approaches to the war-related disinformation. On the one hand, the EU and some member states started banning pro-Russian mouthpieces, such as in the Czech Republic, while we also experience an abundance of Kremlin disinformation narratives and coordinated troll and bot activities. So there is this double-faced phenomenon where you have stricter measures against disinformation, but you also are faced with a very high activity of all types of actors. I would turn first to Grigorij to give his take on the Slovak elite's reaction to the new disinformation landscape, and also, do you see a presence of a similar gray zone in the Slovak Republic?
Yes, thank you very much, Lóránt. Hello to everybody. I am very pleased to participate today in this event. I was invited just to give you certain comparative regional taste of what is happening in this gray zone. We agreed with Lóránt that Lóránt will share my presentation, which I prepared for this debate. So I will be a bit shorter than my presentation. What I did, so I analyzed activity operation of one particular actor of gray zone. I defined this actor as a gray zone. I will explain more about this. It's one Slovak NGO, openly pro-Russian. And so I analyzed how their platform operated since the beginning of Russian-Ukrainian war, what was the content, who were present from authors on this platform, and how it fitted to the general context which exists today in Slovakia. For beginning, a couple of words about the Russian-Ukrainian war context in Slovakia. So the country has a consolidated response to this war. Position of the government, president, and the ruling coalition in the parliament, including Speaker of the Parliament. Really, this position is very consolidated based on 5 points. It's clear condemnation of aggression committed by Russia, full support of Ukraine in its fight against Russian invasion, acceptance of big amount of refugees from Ukraine, support for strong political and economic Western sanctions against the Kremlin, and last but not least, implementation of urgent steps to strengthen the countries of Slovakia's defense capabilities through the expansion of defense ties with NATO and even installment of new weapon system on the border Slovakia with Ukraine. Opposition stances are different, not surprisingly. Anti-American and pro-Russian activities before the war So rejection of approval of the US-Slovak Defense Cooperation Agreement. It was very long political story which transformed the agreement in the technical area into the big political agenda. Then, of course, opposition was spreading narratives about peaceful Russia before the war. And of course, the attack from Russia to Ukraine created very unpleasant situation for opposition because they immediately somehow had to change their interpretation. So they were forced by the circumstances to criticize Russian invasion as a violation of the principle of international law, but at the same time, they were continuing in their pro-Russian activities. So what they presented the idea of refusal of military aid to Ukraine, so no military aid to Ukraine. They blamed government and those who supported Ukraine as a warmongers. So the idea is that delivering weapons would mean that war will be longer. So their peaceful position was de facto the idea of Ukraine's surrender to Russia. And then they started to provoke hostility toward Ukrainian refugees on the basis of social chauvinism and social envy. On media scene, the situation was similar. So mainstream media was very pro-Ukrainian, condemning Russian aggression. So-called alternative media were on the opposite side. But the new element of the situation was that very quickly, Slovak Parliament, on the initiative of the government, approved the special law, which amended several laws, which enabled the National Security Office to block the online platform, which will define as a platform with harmful content and harmful activities in the cyberspace. So the main Slovakia's disinfo outlets, media or online platform, they were blocked. The main reports, Hlavný denník, the main daily, and Infovojna. So now we, as researchers, now we are deprived of continuation of our research activities because these outlets are blocked. It's temporarily blocked. They are temporarily blocked just till the June. We will see what will happen further. I think that it will be prolonged, this blockade, but the fact is that the space for operation of really the prominent disinfo outlets is today in Slovakia refused. And what I did, I have chosen one platform for analysis how the actor which I defined as a local actor of gray zone, how it can operate in this situation. So what I did, I opted for analysis of Slovak Russian society. It's NGO, it's civic association with the absolutely clear position. The name is Slovak Russian Society. In Slovak, it's identical translation, but very interesting thing is that in Russian, the translation of this name into Russian is different. It's, if I'm again translated to English, it's Society of Slovak Russian and either Commonwealth, Concord, or Fraternity. So it means that for the Russians, it's something more than just Slovak Russian society. It's a society which based on the special relations. So even Commonwealth, it's a certain kind of maybe, of course, it's not Slovak Russian world, but it's something more than just friendship or good relations with Russia. So now, very short characteristic of this society. It was founded in 2006 by Jan Czarnogursky, who is a former anti-communist Catholic dissident, former leader of Christian Democratic Movement, former prime minister, minister of justice, and since the end of the 90s, he was and he still is anti-NATO and anti-American activist. He is member of Valdaj Club. He is frequently visiting events organized by Valdaj Club, and when he is returning to Slovakia, he is speaking about greatness of Vladimir Putin as the leader of Russia. So Slovak Russian Society is cooperating openly with Russian Embassy and Russian Center of Culture and Science in Bratislava, and the website of this society is aggregator of contents from own production of this society, people, members of this society, and from other Slovak and Czech pro-Russian platforms. Why I define them as an actor of gray zone? Because maybe they are in something in between gray zone and black zone. They are not reprinting with very small exclusions contents from really disinfo scene outlets. So they are trying to present themselves as a cultivated version of delivering the information. So maybe they are softer version of gray zone, but what is unifying them with either stronger gray zone or black zone is that they are openly pro-Russian. So they are absolutely unambiguous supporter of Russian policies in all areas. And this anti-Russian orientation is combined in the case of this actor with a very strong anti-Western orientation, anti-EU, anti-NATO. It's quite illiberal ideological content of their website and their statements. So I think that in Slovak context, they are really actor of gray zone. Now, just to give you maybe an idea, I mean, what kind of authors are publicized on their website. Maybe these names will not be very telling for majority of participants of today's event, maybe a part of our Czech colleagues, but just to mention that these are authors from Czech Republic, like Jiří Paroubek, who is the former Prime Minister of Czech Republic, and then quite known in Czech Republic and society analysts and political scientists or sociologists like Jan Keller, Oskar Krejčí, very pro-Russian, Jan Schneider. So you see that they're even trying to transcend a right and left side of political spectrum. So they are not only inclining to far right or to right-oriented contents, but they are trying to combine somehow and transcend this line. Concerning Slovakia, among authors of this website is Jan Čarnogórsky, the leader, of course, of the organization, but then also Juraj Draxler, left activist, the former Minister of Education, Anna Belousova, who was the leader of Slovak National Party, and then such people as Eduard Chmelar, maybe he's known beyond of Slovakia's border, Jalal Suleiman, Vice Chairman of Communist Party, Syrian expat. And concerning the Western authors, the selection is quite, I would say, narrow. It's Pat Buchanan and John Mearsheimer. So now I'm concluding, not to take much time. You can find them in my presentation, the concrete statements of these authors and some other authors, but just to summarize, what appeared on this website and what didn't appear since the beginning of Russian-Ukrainian war till now. So what didn't appear on the website of Slovak Russian Society? No one word about war crimes committed by Russian troops. All these atrocities, bombardments, rapes, deportations of civilian population. No any picture of destruction. Cities, local communities, infrastructure, nothing, absolutely nothing caused by Russian invaders. No references to Russian imperialist ambitions and toxic, de facto fascist-like ideology as a motivation for war. But at the same time, also no first-plan root false accusation of Ukrainians in self-destruction, self-bombardment, self-explosions, which is frequently used by Russian narratives. I think that main reason is that Slovak audience is quite well informed about the reality. So the picture of what Russians did to Ukraine is so obvious. Then to invent all these terrible narratives that these were Ukrainians who bombarded themselves, that Ukrainians who exploded the areas in Ukraine. So they didn't use this narratives, and probably it's the main difference between them as a gray zone actor and really these dirty disinform conspiracy platforms. But another thing is very symptomatic what appeared on their website. So, and on the first place is full version of Putin's war speech translated in Slovak. Then announcement of pro-Russian anti-war public events in Bratislava, when opposition parties organize some events, for example, Smer party, then this website helped them to promote this peaceful anti-war protest, but de facto it was criticism of Ukraine and adoration of Russia, people who were speaking in these events. Then letters to and from Russian ambassador, between the society and Russian ambassador, accusation of the West and Ukraine in provocation of war, calling war a consequences of Maidan, accusation of the West in practicing the cultural Russophobia. So now Western response to what is happening in between Ukraine and Russia is that they are targeting Russians, absolutely unfair. So they're expelling Russian expats allegedly from the workplace and so on. So this narrative about Western Russophobia, continuation of Western Russophobia, then allegation that Ukraine is ruled by the West. So it's a de facto repetition of Russian narratives, calling the Slovak government servant of the West and warmongers, and labeling the blocking of disinfo platforms as a censorship and removal of plurality, return to totalitarianism. So now I'm finishing. Again, Lóránt will share the full version of my presentation, and then you can some very peculiar statements which will summarized by me in my presentation, 3 slides, very concrete with the attribution to the concrete names who presented this idea. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm glad to be with you today.
Thank you very much, Grigorij, for your full overview of pro-Russian actors, organizations, and communication in Slovakia. And it proves 2 things. First, we should have research Slovakia as well. And second is that it is extremely important to go beyond the pro-Russian narratives and media and see the background to the organizations and try to uncover the deeper structures, which we also aimed in our research, but had problems with it. Now I would like to turn to Adam. You guys at the Beacon Project conduct lots of different media monitoring and analytical tasks and researchers when it comes to Russia's hybrid war. There's an impression right now, voiced by many European experts or even politicians, that Ukraine is winning the information war. Do you agree with that statement? Or how do you see it based on your experience and regional overview?
Hi, everyone. So let me start by thanking for this invitation to join you. And we are really glad at the Beacon Project that we could closely collaborate with you and contribute to your project. And, you know, this is Gray Zone Media from our perspective. Is one of the representations how the information threats are evolving. And, you know, personally, I think that this is important voice in the, you know, looking for different kinds of methodology for this evolution, how to, you know, notice the changes and, you know, important voice in terms also how the research is being done, because in the past, we often found that, you know, the terminology that different organizations are using for, you know, media monitoring, they don't include this new category. You know, in terms of your question, we don't work as much in Ukraine as we would like, because this is a different division. In terms of what we can experience, you know, working with our partners, basically, yeah, we can say that Ukraine is winning, and, you know, those changes that all of them that were mentioned here by you and by other panelists, like, you know, closing of the pro-Kremlin and Kremlin mouthpieces in our region, they are, you know, only strengthening this evolution. And you know, the tendency that we are noticing is the rise in the, I wouldn't say quality, but definitely quantity anonymous accounts in the social media. The war in Ukraine also forced and helped many different organizations and researchers to investigate more of those activities on the social media. But what is particularly interesting in terms of our region, there are two groups of countries, the countries that Twitter is popular and Twitter is not popular, and we have different processes. So, for example, when we look at Romania or Bulgaria, there is a different, information ecosystem without Twitter. And in Poland, for example, Twitter, is dominating in the terms of, media coverage and expert discussion. So Twitter has a lot of influence on the Polish internal, political debates. So this is quite hard to grasp. And, I would really definitely like to see in the future, prolongation of your research activities in the region, because, the gray zone media and, what you mentioned before, like looking at the hidden structures and looking at the financing, interconnections, this would be, like the final solution on our war with information threats in our region. And this is what was missing for years, So huge percentage of research activities are focused on identifying fake news. This is the easiest part. And, to be frank, it isn't helping a lot, We need those information, but it's like the baseline, what we need. And what we are really missing is digging deeper, looking at those interconnections, and finding the correlations between activities of anonymous accounts and how they are filling into this gray zone media activities, the hostile actors, that remain to be, not so popular, and they may not have as much influence on the mainstream discussion, but, our information environment is changing, and, people, this hyper partisan content is growing in, everywhere in every country, I think. And, it was partially strengthened by the anti-vax movements. But right now we all see in our countries the evolution, how the anti-vax accounts are shifting to anti-Ukrainian narratives, pro-Russian narratives, pro-peace narratives. And this is really problematic. And this is like, there are so many new accounts right now. And, what is, for example, I will also, one point of reference, once again, to Poland, there were moments that the content published by those anonymous accounts that were feeding into different groups or were used, even by the mainstream actors on Twitter, it was so violent. The big, this was trying to picture the Ukrainians as really violent, not the Russians, shifting the discussion. And it was strongly, anchored in the topic of rising number of refugees, Ukrainian refugees in Poland, but also in the region. So, this may pose really great threat. There are new kinds of threats, because our not only information environment is evolving, but also our security environment is evolving in a more kinetic way. And the neighboring countries have particularly Eastern flank, NATO Eastern flank countries have particularly difficult situation. So even though we may seem that, in general, Ukraine is winning in our region, and the political goals that Putin may, had in the past, may have in the past, they didn't play out as he thought. But still, new threats, occurred in our countries that we need to face. And I don't think that, everyone was prepared enough, and the financial structures for research projects and for, civil society organization organizations isn't developed enough. So let's hope that the Western response to this threat will also evolve and adapt to the situation and help us, to keep those hostile actors, shut down for as long as possible, or change their tactics. But we need to be more proactive, not only do the research, after something terrible happens. So, your research really contributes to the discussion about methodology, how we should perceive certain actors that couldn't be included in the category of media outlets, but still, they are trying to do the job of media outlets and influencing people and take part in the internal political discussions, and unfortunately strengthening dangerous tendencies, especially the polarization that is one of the biggest problems, and hyper-partisan content, which is, highly, strongly connected with different issues and will influence our security situation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. I think you highlighted two very crucial problems. The first is that, as you mentioned, the information environment is rapidly changing. And I think that applies to gray zone or other types of fringe media very much, because they are very flexible in their ways to, evolving and using new technological platform, whereas us as researchers or policy advisors, we still need to up our game as well. So this is the first important issue you touched upon. The second one is when it comes to the war, we tend to forget that even if Russia or Putin cannot attain his political goals, when it comes to the information realm and their disinformation tactics and strategies, they can still do much harm and hit us in unexpected ways. And I would channel your suggestions right into the next question of media regulation, because it has become sort of a centerpiece of Euro-Atlantic discussion and also European legislation. And what is your take on the current debate? Would you favor a stricter approach by banning as many professional outlets as possible? Or you think we should move towards more of a proactive approach, as Adam said, and counter messaging such as the new Polish government, Polish campaign, the Stop Russia Now campaign that has just launched yesterday in Hungary, in Hungarian, because we don't have such a campaign, obviously. And I would like to ask Kristína first that in your research results, you indicated that there was a short breakdown of the anti-vax communication because they were not sure whether to support or oppose the Russian aggression. And do you think that had to do with your stricter approach when it comes to banning specific media?
So I think you're talking about the anti-vaccination movement, Otevřeme Česko, chci PES. So originally, especially their spokesperson expressed this understanding of Putin's moves and reiterated narrative about genocide in Donbass and to need to liberate these people. But then this movement actually started organizing help for Ukrainian refugees, and this caused this sort of a split in the party itself, and also among its supporters who tend towards anti-immigration stances and saw this as this turn of the party's previous declarations. So I would say I'm in favor of a more proactive approach, and I think this is especially important on social media, since in the Czech Republic, I would say Facebook is still one of the most active platform when it comes to spreading these manipulative narratives. But of course, it is changing, and a lot of the actors spreading disinformation have moved to Telegram, for example, the online messaging service. And even though this trend has been like going on slowly for some time, now it was definitely intensified by the blockage of the disinformation website. And Sputnik is also one of these actors that moved over there, even though, as far as I know, it was also like blocked twice, but every time came up with a new account. So yeah, I think a proactive approach in like countering this fact-checking, but also doing some more like long-term baseline, how to say, measures, like especially spreading media literacy and such is still the key. And also definitely a whole society approach. So involving the state, even the private sector, civil society, media, like everybody needs to work together, because this is a complex issue that pertains to all these parts of society.
Thank you. I would now turn to Nikola, and I would have a hard question for you. Do you think Serbia is a lost cause? Because similarly to Hungary, it seems to have become a bastion of anti-Western pro-Russian communication. And how do you see, even given the gray zone specificities in this current situation, would it take a better regulation or more resources, or what would it take to change things there, at least slightly, in favor of a more balanced political and media space?
Well, that is a very direct question, a very hard one. I would say I do not think that Serbia is lost in that sense, and I believe that when we're talking about the Russian influence, especially the Russian media influence, most of the problems are political, and they have to do with the particular government which governs Serbia, and the political landscape which the government itself has created or allowed. And when the government interests change, so will the reporting. But this will not solve the problem. The problem is still there. The problem is actually media capture. That's the most important problem. And then connected to it, there are problems of media literacy, and the propensity of the people to believe everything they read on the internet, which kind of allows all kinds of conspiracy theories and all kinds of pro-Russian narratives to survive. I would say that in Serbia, you have basically three kinds of pro-Russian media. The first, of course, are the Russian media themselves, which is, first of all, Sputnik, which is quite influential in Serbia media space, but not that much. It's the only Russian media which is influential in Serbia. Then you have these pro-government mainstream tabloids and other media which were promoting Russia and promoting the Serbian government and promoting like this kind of cooperation between Serbia and Russia, therefore trying to portray the government as cooperating with Russia and being on good terms with Russia. And these media were very, very pro-Russian. So they were putting Putin on hundreds of front pages, literally, in a single year. There have been calendars with Putin given together with these newspapers. I honestly believe that these were some of the most pro-Putinist media in the world. Not even in Russia, I think such media existed as you could find here in Serbia, basically every day on the newsstands. And then, of course, you have this anti-government media, which tend to be in the gray zone, which are anti-government and they're pro-Russian. So they are trying to somehow show Russia as a savior of Serbia and Serbian national interests, and to show the government as traitorous and basically not defending Serbian national interests in the right way. And what we have seen now, actually, it is very important now after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is that because the political, the environment has changed, because of the war and because of the need of the Serbian government to align at least to a degree with the Western policy on Russia, with some of the sanctions, with voting in the UN, etc., there was a need to somehow change how the media, at least the pro-government media, report about Russia. So, for example, at the beginning of the of the war, actually one day before the beginning of the invasion, we had this infamous headline in the most read newspapers in Serbia, Ukraine attacked Russia. So this was the narrative up to one day before the invasion. So this is how it was in the pro-government media. So these were messages sanctioned by the government. And you had these messages for years, even in the months before the invasion, you had all of these narratives where the West is to blame for the escalation and the crisis, where Russia is threatened, where Ukrainians are fascists and they're killing Russian civilians in Donbass, et cetera, et cetera. So you had all of these messages in a similar way, I would say, in these pro-government and anti-government media. But after the invasion and after it was evident that the Serbian government needs to align, at least in secret, with some of the sanctions or some of the decisions, you then had a need of the government to have some messages which are going to justify Serbian actions, especially because all this happened in the middle of the election campaign. This is very important. So you could see how some of the media at least have gradually shifted their approach. The focus was no longer on promoting Russia and blaming the West for everything, but basically saying how both sides are to blame, how Ukrainians are suffering because of this global game of great powers. And basically that Serbia needs to withstand all of these pressures, and somehow maintain stability and survive, wed this storm. And this has been the dominant message. But now after the elections, when there is much stronger pressure now on the Serbian government on some government of Serbia, which is yet to be formed actually, or the current technical one to align with some sanctions, either that or loses its EU perspective. Now some of these media are starting to actually spread very strong anti-Putin messages, which is the first time in years. I think that research done before this has shown that basically these media, the anti-Russia messages, negative reporting about Russia and Putin were absent completely from this media. This is the first time we see it. Only actually yesterday, Putin said he justified the recognition of Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics by the recognition of Kosovo and the decision of the International Court of Justice in 2010, which practically means that he recognized legitimacy of the Kosovo's independence. And now the tabloids, which gave calendars with his face a couple of years ago, are now saying that he backstabbed Serbia and that he recognized the fake state, or whatever the exact words are. So you could see how these pro-government media are changing the stance because of the government's interests. But on the other hand, these gray zone media, which we have examined in this research, did not change the approach. They maintained their strong pro-Russian messaging. And of course, this messaging is not, at least in some of these cases, is not working interest of the government and actually could hurt the government. And you can argue it did, because as I mentioned in the first panel, some of these right-wing parties who were strongly against sanctioning Russia benefited within the campaign, I would say, at least partially due to this kind of media and messages coming from this kind of media. So I remember that when we did together similar research a couple of years ago on pro-Russian narratives in Serbia, our conclusions were that Russia as an actor is not that important in Serbian media space and does not influence Serbian media space as much as it is just driven domestically by domestic politics and by the need of the government to portray itself as pro-Russian, and by the need of some, let's say, right-wing opposition parties to show how the government is traitorous while they are pro-Russian. So it was kind of accidental, basically, support to Russia that was spread from all of these media. But part of the conclusions we had back then is that the two real problems are, first of all, lack of media freedom, which means that media can just turn the way somebody wants, which is a permanent problem. It might be apparently resolved in a moment if somebody's interests are like that, but it stays a problem in the long term. And the second thing is that even though Russia is not involved that strongly, you could even say we don't need Russian involvement here to have Russian narratives. It still gives ample space for Russia to use this space in the future. So right now, for example, you can argue quite easily that there could be a problem for the Serbian government and for the pro-Western opposition if Russia actually tried to use this space and the sentiments held by the population, thanks to all this propaganda, to actually spread some messages which are going to hurt all pro-Western or even, let's say, mildly pro-Western actors. And there is now ample space for that. And you could see already how this is becoming a real threat. So as I said in the beginning, I would say definitely on the one hand, it has to do with politics in sense of political will of the government, whether to have such kind of messages or not, whether to stop this kind of influence or not. But of course, we have to focus on the basics about the media landscape in Serbia, the media freedom, about not only regulation, but its implementation and actually establishing a media sphere where media are independent, where rules are enforced, and where they're not captured by neither the government or other political parties, nor external actors. Because like this, the Serbian media landscape is fundamentally vulnerable to this kind of influences, and this could be quite a strong stabilizing factor in the future, especially having in mind how much not only Serbia, but I would say the entire Balkans is a place with lots of potential crisis, or lots of nationalist animosities, and a lot of potential for violence if somebody wanted to use this and spread this kind of messages.
Thank you, Nikola. So we are nearing our end of our session. I would have just posing question for everybody. And I know Adam is leaving soon. It's basically the silver bullet just to reflect on how we should deal with warfare in general. Do you see some sort of European or transatlantic consensus forming, or you think that going forward means that each country will have its own solution and will be dealing it on an individual? What would you say?
I think that this will be a combination of both, but answering this question and a bit the former question that you asked, European Union should be, from my perspective, more active in strategic communication on what is being done on the institutional level with this info. And a lot of the initiatives, they are not getting, Digital Services Act or Digital Markets Act, that are really important. And within them, we have, important, cornerstones that whole EU community will be building their, information infrastructure on, and this is not covered in the national media. This is not, presented on the EU level as much as it should be, regarding how important all of this is. And, this is like the real problem, strategic communication component on the national level and on the EU level. And I would say that on the NATO level as well, like every system and security system is interconnected, and I know that this is a cliche right now. We are as weak as our weakest link, but still this reference is relevant to some point, and I think that we in the EU created a huge potential of what can be done, especially comparing to the solutions present in other states across the world. So I think that we only should better use them and use the examples of countries like Czech Republic or Finland or Sweden or Estonia or Latvia, and try to implement what is best from those systems, and try to implement and communicate better what we want to achieve, and communicate better with our societies and civil society organizations, because this component is still underdeveloped, and you know, the countries like Finland and Czech Republic, they know about this, so they started to doing a lot of different activities on this direction, but you know, it's not the rule. Thank you so much. I need to run. Hope to see everyone soon on other events. Once again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Adam. So, Grigorij, in one or two sentences, because we are right now at the end.
Yes, thank you. Well,
session.
Yeah.
How do you see this problem?
Yeah, I see this issue, this problem in a broader context of what is now happening in position of the West concerning the intensification of support to Ukraine. And I think that it's indication that maybe it's typical now for this area, but I think that inevitably it will be reflected in positions of main players in other areas. I mean, the Western world, I think that today realized that we are in the huge confrontation with the one rock actor. And this rock actor not only invaded the neighboring countries, it's a specific agenda, but during the long period of time tried to destroy us, tried to destroy the fundaments of the social and political order, which is typical for us. And in information area, it was really the battle. It was the battle. And I think that on the background of what is happening in this context of the better understanding whom we have as our challenger, that it is rock regime, and this rock regime deserves from our side very strong response. In security area, now support for Ukraine in defense area, and of course in protection of our values and preservance of our society as a free society, which wouldn't allow any toxic and rock intruders to weaken us. And from this point of view now, I am more optimistic than maybe even 1 week ago.
For the uplifting message, but I think we can all agree that a new consensus sort of is forming to assist Ukraine and oppose the aggression. Kristína, you already have, you know, pretty hard regulation. Do you see those amplified or on the contrary, to not to pursue them in the longer term? How do you see that currently Czech debate?
So I would agree that a combination of the EU and national level would be a way to go, because on the one hand, we need to be sensitive to like the local context and local information sees, but also we should use the tools and platforms that are provided to us by organizations such as EU. And, you know, right now in the Czech Republic, the blockage of the disinformation websites was basically done by a private subject. It was the national domain operator. And yes, it was done based on recommendations from the government and the Czech intelligence services, but didn't set up the most transparent legal and institutional framework. And we could see in Slovakia that they were able to actually pass a law which enables the National Security Authority to do this, which I would say is a more transparent model of responsibility, at least. So I agree with what Adam said about trying to take inspiration from each other, from the other countries, and just put the best practices together to find some transparent model. Because right now in Czech Republic, there were many comments and criticism about what was the process by which the blog websites were chosen. How does this work? So I think there needs to be some improvements in the future, but it is good to see some new initiative from the authorities, and they are taking disinformation more and more seriously.
I also think that we are at the beginning of a new debate, basically on a European level, what to do with this information has just started. And finally, Nikola, you mentioned the outer pressures on Serbian government that force it to change its communication course. Do you see that as resulting in more systemic changes or maybe change in regulation? How you see things going forward after the elections?
It's really hard to say because we still don't know who will form the new government, and the reason we do not know who will form the new government actually has to do with the necessity to implement some of the sanctions, because the ruling SNS could easily form the government with the same partners, but now these partners are much more strongly pro-Russian than them, and therefore that complicates things significantly. It depends on what kind of pressure actually comes from the West meaning the United States and the European Union, of course, whether it's only about short-term alignment with the EU and with Western sanctions and decisions, or it's a matter of a long-term orientation towards not only in foreign policy, but also it comes to democracy in Serbia, rule of law, and then consequently European integration. That depends on the Western actors. And I believe we can here all hope for this kind of more fundamental pressure about the fundamental issues, as well as the foreign policy orientation, because if it's just foreign policy orientation, then we could easily have a turn where the government will continue basically to hold the same kind of power over the media space, but just twist it the way they're required to, which may be good in that sense of aligning with the West, but would not fundamentally resolve any of the issues we have here.
Thank you very much. So let's try to end our session and discussion on a positive note. There is a fundamental change in the security and also media infrastructures in our region and in Europe. Hopefully, that will result in a new order that is more liberal and more in control of the disinformation. So I would like to thank our researchers and our wonderful panel for participating in our debate. And thank you for all of our audience for tuning in.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.